All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Max Guinness, co-founder and CEO of PolicyEngine, and I'm here with my colleagues David Trimmer and Pavel Makarchuk, who will share with you some of our latest research and really the process behind turning that research into policy impact. So we at PolicyEngine provide an open source software platform for simulating policy effects like tax transfers and tax credits as well. So in Rhode Island, we've had the pleasure of working with the Niskanen Center, who commissioned a new tool from us to bring to life some of the pieces of our model that are relevant to Rhode Island residents and especially families regarding tax credits. So David will talk about the process, the tool we built, um, and sort of what the impact of this new proposal is that comes out of the governor's office. And then you'll also get to hear from Pavel, who will talk about some of the and demonstrate some of the new tools we're looking to expand across the country, especially as we develop more of our state level policy modeling. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat or just come off mute and ask away. So David, take away.
Thanks. Yeah, so let me share my screen. We have actually a presentation for you all. All right, so we're actually going to skip forward a little bit to and get right into it. So we were commissioned by the Niskanen Center, as Max said, to build a Rhode Island specific policy exploration tool to model alternative designs for the state's personal exemption for dependents and a potential child tax credit reform. So earlier last year, the Niskanen Center was hearing potential reforms from either the governor's office or legislators over bringing a child tax credit to the state of Rhode Island. So they then commissioned us to build a tool to explore different policy options. And the options we modeled were converting the state's personal exemption, which is basically an exemption that lowers taxable income for each household member, the possibility of converting that for dependents into a refundable child tax credit. And then we played around with different parameters such as what would the credit amount be or the age eligibility. Would this credit be non-refundable, partially refundable, or fully refundable? And I can go into detail of what all those means once we demo the calculator. Do we want this credit to phase out, and what kind of phase out structure? One that mirrors the state's personal exemption, which phases out in steps, or maybe a flat rate above a threshold. And with all those different parameters, also looking at the dependent exemption, if that wanted to be phased out, or if we wanted to lower the amount or cancel the amount out completely. And in the calculator, you can see the household impact. So if you put in your household details, you can see how these reforms would affect a specific family situation across different income levels. And then also our statewide impacts. So this would be the effect on the budgetary, the state budget, basically. Would poverty fall? How would inequality be adjusted? And some distributional outcomes. How would the average household benefit under this proposal? And depending on like what income range there and what would the impacts be there? So we built this tool and sent it over to the Niskanen Center. And they, in turn, after testing it and playing around with some different options, they sent it to Governor Dan McKee's office. And using our calculator, which helped inform their eventual child tax credit proposal that made it into the fiscal year 2027 budget. As you can see, we got a quote from the governor. He said, "I'm grateful to the PolicyEngine team for building the models that helped us see clearly how different policy choices would affect Rhode Island families. The ability to test options in real time strengthened our proposal and helped us design a child tax credit that will deliver more than $30 million each year to the families who need it most." And so the actual proposal that he had was a $325 per child fully refundable credit, and this would be available to everyone under the age of 19. The phase out would begin at $261,000. That's actually the 2026 number. It would be uprated when this proposal goes into effect in 2027, so it's slightly higher than that. And then that would be applied to all filing statuses. And then the personal exemption for all children who are eligible for this new child tax credit, their exemption would go away. So it essentially swaps it. So now let's go through the actual policy here. So I'm going to just unshare my screen very quickly. 1 second. So I can bring up the calculator. Okay. Here we go. Okay, so you go to policyengine.org US Rhode Island CTC calculator. And as you can see, we have some inputs on the left side that we can fill out. So first we ask users to start with their household and dependents. So we default to tax year 2027 since that's what the governor's proposal, but if you would like, you can also calculate for 2026. And then we ask some basic information. What's your adjusted gross income? Are you married? How old are you? And how many dependents and what their ages are. So for this example, we can just use what is pre-filled $50,000 gross income, one dependent, age of 5. And then we can also look at different reform options. So we'll get to this apply governor's proposal button in a sec, but so you can customize a different child tax credit. So right here, you can enter a various amount and you can see, and you can put in what you want the age limit to be. So at what age would the credit no longer apply? We also have a young child boost amount. So this would be an additional credit on top of whatever this amount is right here. So you could put in, a higher amount there that would apply to children under another age bracket. So if you put 500 here, children under the age of 6 will get 1,500, while children under the age of 18 will get 1,000. And then you can play around with different phase out structures. You can use the stepped phase out structure in the governor's proposal, or if you just want a simple rate above a threshold for a smoother phase out structure, you can use that too. And then you can customize the dependent exemption. So we can enable it by hitting this check mark, and we can put in a different amount. This is the amount we project for 2026. If you wanted to lower that or even set it to 0, you could. And if you only want this reform to apply to a certain age group and not just all dependents, you could put in an age threshold here and also phase out threshold if you would like. So after the governor announced their proposal, we added this button that applies the governor's proposal and all the parameters that I just went under. So if we click this, you can see now all of the inputs have pre-filled to the governor's proposal. So we have the $325 amount, 19 age limit, and we have the governor's phase-out structure, and we also have the dependent exemption set to 0 for children under the age of 19. So we can calculate the impact, and that will start running, and we can calculate this impact analysis would be household, and then this statewide impact would be the revenue poverty impacts that we would see. I believe I have this preloaded. Oh, might have reset actually. So let's start with the statewide impacts for this proposal. So right here, you can see these different cards we have with different impacts. So we project a total cost of $36.7 million for tax year 2027, 120,000 households benefiting, and reduction of 1% of the poverty rate overall, and child poverty 2.1%. And because this proposal sets the credit at 325, the personal exemption per household member in 2027 would provide a maximum benefit of $317. So at a credit of $325, no one is worse off. So we see 29.2% of people in Rhode Island are better off. We say that they're winners, and then there are 0 losers, 0 people with net income lower under this reform. And then let's see if we can switch back to here, if any of these tabs have loaded. Unfortunately not. While we go over this, I'll just start describing what it should look like. So what we'll have is a graph that shows a line graph that shows how net income changes as a household earns more money. So at the low end of the income distribution, if they have $0 to $20,000 AGI, they would benefit by the entire amount of the credit, because the personal exemption does not provide any benefit to households at those levels, because the standard deduction in the state removes all tax liability already. And then as income increases and households move up the tax brackets, you'll see net income slowly drop in these different steps. And then once income reaches a high enough amount, they'll benefit by a few dollars, because the personal exemption value of 317 is being removed, while the $325 credit's replacing that. So they benefit by about $8 per child. And then once you reach the $266,000 phase out threshold, and that, I should say, lines up pretty closely with the phase out structure of the personal exemption. You see the benefit basically the net income stay basically still. Here we go. So as I was describing here, at low income, benefit by all the credit. Once you move up the tax brackets, benefit reduces a little bit more in these steps. And then here, this is just because the inflation adjustments don't line up correctly, or they don't line up because the dollar amounts are uprated to different values. So you do sometimes see these sharp adjustments, but basically the credits very slowly dropping to 0 as the CTC phases out and as the personal exemption would phase out. And then you have a change in net income of $0 above that point. So, this is just the governor's proposal. There are other CTC reforms that you can play around with the calculator. Pavel, I'm not sure if you have, but if you want, you can put the link in the chat so everybody can see it. And, if there might be other proposals that come out of the state that look at higher credit amounts, or maybe a young child boost amount, you can use the calculator to see what those options would yield as well. Let me go back to the slides if I can. Oops, 1 second. Oops. Sorry, 1 sec. Okay. Yes, so that's the calculator, and we'll share the link to these slides as well. We did an analysis of the governor's proposal, so you can look at our blog posts online. And if you want to dig deeper into the full story of how this calculator came to be and how we constructed it, we also have a press release at our website as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Pavel now, and he's going to talk about what's next in Rhode Island and what we're planning nationwide.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, very excited about the opportunity to work with the governor and all our partners to put together this calculator. We've been looking at building these tools ad hoc for a long time, especially looking at the state legislative session. I think there are a lot of nuanced policy discussions that various think tanks and other organizations are trying to contribute to. And we want to make sure we can rapidly iterate through these tools as these interests shift. And obviously it's a moving target, but we want to be as supportive as we can to build any of these dashboards. Just for some context as well, This took us about a week or two to put together. So we've been looking into other states, obviously tracking further the Rhode Island policy developments, and then building tools that are more from a high level, can give us perspective on how we can really look through a lot of these problems. David, since you're sharing your screen, if you could pull up this link, um, because I don't have sharing rights. I would love to go through, yes, the state legislative tracker. So here we've been tracking the bills and proposals that are coming out of each individual state. We're starting to roll it out now. We'll probably fully launch it early next week. And to demonstrate by an example, if you look, for example, at Ohio on the for the left side, of the map, we have some analysis that we're looking to share in the future. So that will probably come out in early February, in the next couple of weeks. And then to give an example what this tool can do analytically, if we go to Utah, there we have a bill, which is the SB 60, a fairly straightforward income tax rate cut that we have preloaded with the impacts. So statewide impacts in terms of revenue, poverty. We can also look at district level breakdowns, since we have recently enhanced our state data set to zoom in. So each congressional district is run through this policy, so we can see how these congressional districts are affected, percentage of winners, average household income gain. And then there's also a similar household calculator on top of this. So that will not be preloaded. Here you can enter some basic information similar to what David have shared: marital status, age, household net income, and then calculate the impact of that bill. And as these bills get increasingly more complex, and if we don't want to build custom tools, right, build down calculator, we'll track them here, as well as a link to the reference where we're getting it from, and kind of iterating through that, as well as some other resources that we've built on the state side as well as on the federal side. So we're very excited to share this. We're very excited to look further. The second bigger announcement we're going to have this week, the second link I've shared in the Zoom, David, is we have obviously had our eyes on AI development for a long time, and our colleague Zimming is about to publish a paper about automating tax and benefit policy modeling with multi-agent AI. And there's a lot of detail here. We don't need to go through every single piece, but we wanted to really demonstrate our process over the last 4 or 5 months of how we arrived at a full, complete workflow, starting at a single prompt, building a more developed core pipeline. We also have some details on what the technical requirements here are. There's some documentation from Anthropic, but yeah, basically parallelizing our structures and then going all the way down to the 6th step, which is a final iteration where we can model these programs basically in one big prompt, validating it, testing it, iteratively adjusting, and then pushing it to production. And this has saved us, usually for context, when we add, for example, a state-specific TANF program or a localized program for some of our benefit partners, it would take us about 2 to 3 weeks to fully bring it to production. With this new workflow, we can do it in 90 minutes. It's fully tested. It's fully referenced against primary sources. We have implemented this now for over 45 programs, some of which are used by our API partners in different states, TANF across 42 states, etc. Wrote over 60,000 lines of code. So very excited to share this afterwards as well and get the word out on that. But those are really the main things for us. Really excited to share up the developments. Really excited about the progress in Rhode Island. Obviously going to continue monitoring that, and then working with our partners to have the most impact on the state legislative session. If there's any questions, feel free to either raise it now. You know where to reach us, either David or myself or Max. I'm very happy to chat about anything that we went through. Happy to share any additional resources that we might have. And thank you so much for tuning in today.
If
Awesome.
there's any questions on Rhode Island or any of the other work that we're currently working on, let us know.
I have one question on Rhode Island's proposal.
Sure.
I know it replaces the dependent exemption. Does it also replace the personal exemption for parents too, or is it just that dependent exemption?
So yeah, good question. It is just the dependent exemption for children eligible for the child tax credit. So basically,
Mhm.
children 18 years old and younger get the child tax credit instead of the personal exemption.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
Hey, I was just wondering about your legislative tracker. What types of things are you tracking or wanting to include?
Yes, good question. The process there is we have integrated the Legiscan API. I don't know if you heard of Legiscan. It's basically a tool
No.
that tracks any bill that comes out of the state legislature, and we're filtering down to income tax and benefit related bills. So any proposals in tax credits, income tax rate changes, if they are looking into changes into SNAP. I know after the big beautiful bill, there has been some conversations around that as well as Medicaid. Are we looking to include all of those programmatically for any state that is currently in session? Um, and then we'll probably filter down because there's going to be a lot of bills coming out. We'll filter out anything that has not been like passing the House for a couple months or so or rolling over from previous sessions. But hopefully next week, the way it's going to be set up is we'll be able to just feed it a bill if we don't have it. And then you can just get impacts ad hoc without having to do any policy engine encoding.
Perfect. That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and Tiffany, just to mention, yeah, we've been working on tracking some more bills from Utah so that marriage penalty amendment bill, we're planning to add that to the calculator here shortly.
Oh, perfect. And we have a couple recently with the CTC. There's one expansion. There's extended maternity leave, a couple other smaller things. But if you need support on any of that, let me know.
That sounds great. And if, yeah, for Tiffany and anyone here, if there's any bills that you're interested at the state level, feel free to send them to us. And we're happy to model them and include them in our legislative tracker and then get back to you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mhm. All right. I guess that's it. Thank you all for attending. We appreciate your time and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
All right.